Welcome. My name is Karina, and I'm the Virtual Engagement Manager for Plant Powered Metro New York. We're an organization committed to your empowerment, helping you access critical information about how food and lifestyle impact our health. But we don't stop there. We want to help you make change in a joyful and sustainable way. We all know that food is more than just fuel, but as new data comes in, we see more and more that food is one of the most powerful tools for change. Every meal we eat has the potential to shape our health, heal our communities, and safeguard the planet we all share. Today, we join people around the globe in celebrating the United Nations World Food Day. This year is especially meaningful as it marks the 80th anniversary of the Food and Agriculture Organization. It's a moment that brings together advocates from more than 150 countries to champion food security, nutrition, and sustainability. The theme for 2025, Hand in Hand for Better Foods and a Better Future, reminds all of us that collaboration is essential. Governments, schools, farmers, health professionals, and families all play a role in ensuring that everyone has access to healthy, sustainable food. We are honored to host this special live stream event to highlight the work of two inspiring leaders. First, Dr. Meagan Grega will guide us through her model of positive change from preventing chronic disease to strengthening our health and communities and even our environment. Next, her colleague and daughter, Chef Amanda Pietrobono, will bring these ideas to life with a cooking demonstration live. She'll share a satisfying plant-powered dish filled with anti-inflammatory spices that we can all try at home. Then we'll wrap it all up with the Q&A toward the end. Please put your questions in the comment section at any point. And so let's jump in. I'd like to introduce Dr. Meagan Grega. Dr. Grega is the co-founder and chief medical officer of Kellyn Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to making the healthy choice the easy choice. Kellyn provides school-based healthy lifestyle education and garden as a classroom programs, supports access to nutrient-dense produce via their Eat Real Food mobile market, engages participants in hands-on plant-based cooking classes in community settings, and offers intensive therapeutic lifestyle change interventions for families and individuals. Dr. Grega earned her MD degree from the University of Pennsylvania Medical School and spent several years as a medical officer in the US Navy. She's very generous with her time, and it's always wonderful to have you with us, Dr. Grega. Thanks for making time to be here tonight. And if you're ready, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Karina. I really appreciate the honor of being here tonight. I'm excited to talk with everybody on World Food Day. And how about we get started with the slides? All right, so for today, we're going to be talking about eating for impact, plant-based cuisine as a path to human and planetary health. And I'm thrilled to have Chef Amanda Pietrobono to be a part of this demonstration. But first, let's talk about why is it so important for us to focus on plant-forward or plant-predominant nutrition. I love this quote by Dr. Dariush Mozaffarian, where he says, "We have underestimated the power of food to prevent and reverse disease. And it's really the most potent tool we have." And I think that's something that we didn't necessarily realize when I became a doctor back in the last century, back in the 1990s, but it has definitely become a key tool that we have and a really important thing for us to focus on as far as our health, well-being, and longevity. So let's start out with a question. True or false? Would you say, is there no scientific consensus about the components of a healthy diet? It seems like dietary recommendations are constantly changing and it's impossible to keep up with the latest research. Now, I can't see all of you guys out there, but I want you to think about, do you think that's true or false? Well, I would say that I could understand your frustration. If you're not totally sure, or if there's people in your family and your friends that are saying, you know, it's so confusing. I hear about all these different diets. There's the intermittent fasting. There's the Mediterranean diet. There's the paleo, the vegan. Like, it seems like there's new ones that come out all the time. It's so confusing. Well, it may seem kind of confusing in our general media world or in the marketing world, but the truth is when we're actually talking about the scientific consensus, what's really in the peer-reviewed literature, there's no confusion at all. Because places like the American Heart Association, the American Stroke Association, International Society of Hypertension, World Health Organization, American College of Cardiology, American Diabetes Association, I could go on and on. I could have filled this slide with logos of different medical organizations, but all of them come to about the same consensus about what are the components of a healthy dietary pattern. And this is the summary. It's basically to follow a low sodium, high potassium dietary pattern that includes consumption of ample servings of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and beans, and limits the amounts of saturated fat, red meat, processed foods containing added sugars, sodium, and refined grains, and sugar-sweetened beverages. They all say that is the kind of foundation of optimal nutrition. And you can understand why. When you look at this is actually some data from the U.S. Global Burden of Disease report. If you look at the top risk factor for our morbidity, the things that make us sick, and our mortality, which are the things that kill us, our dietary risks are actually the most prominent, the one that has the most impact. It's even more impactful than tobacco use. So the things that we are eating and also the things that we are not eating have a huge impact on our health and our longevity and vitality. So plants are truly the epigenetic pharmacy. We talk about our DNA and the DNA that we're born with, the genes that we have when we are born, but we have a huge impact on what genes are expressed, so which ones are turned on and turned off based on the food we eat and a lot of the other lifestyle choices that we make. So when we look at the foods that are most health promoting, those are the foods that you see here on this slide and similar examples. So those fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, whole grains, beans, spices, mushrooms, those are the things that are going to be turning on the genes that are most health promoting and also potentially turning down or off the genes that are most associated with chronic disease. So if this is what we would like to have everybody eating, lots of color, lots of fiber, unprocessed or minimally processed foods, how are we doing with that? Well, the things that we would say are the most recommended are this whole food plant predominant dietary pattern like we just talked about. But as far as what we are actually eating, it might be more things like this. More of the ice cream or the pizza, sugar sweetened beverages, lots of different snack foods that are out there. And when we think about what's going to be more important for us from a microbiome standpoint, we want to think about eating a lot of different types of plants. So not only just eating those things that we talked about before, which are those fruits and veggies, whole grains, beans, nuts and seeds, mushrooms, spices, those are all important, but to eat a variety of them. So when we're talking about eating a plant predominant or a plant forward diet, that doesn't mean just eating like bananas and rice and that's all that you end up eating. The more variety of plant-based foods you have, usually the healthier your microbiome. So the goal is to eat at least 30 different types of plant-based foods over the course of a week, and that seems to really make a difference as far as the type of bacteria and the variety of bacteria that are found in our gut microbiome. Now, the gut microbiome is still relatively new. I think we're learning a whole lot more about it than we knew maybe like 20 years ago. I expect that we'll continue to learn even more as time goes on, but there's no doubt that it is a critical component of our health and our well-being. So there's good news, which is that if people switch to an optimal diet, which was defined in this particular study as a higher intake of whole grains and beans, fish, fruits and veggies, nuts, and a decreased intake of red and processed red meats, sugar-sweetened beverages, and refined grains, if people switch to that type of a dietary pattern from a typical Western or standard American diet that we call the SAD diet, if you did that at age 20, you could get an extra 10, almost 11 years of healthy life expectancy. And for guys, actually 13. So women about 10 and a half, guys 13. If you waited till you're age 60, which I wouldn't recommend, but if you did, women and men still get 8 or more years of healthy life expectancy. And even waiting until age 80, women and men can both still see almost 3.5 more years of healthy life expectancy switching to that more optimal dietary pattern. And if you really want to get the biggest bang for your buck, The largest gains are seen from eating more beans. You're going to hear throughout all of this how much Chef Amanda and I love beans, but more beans, more whole grains and nuts, and less red meat and processed meat. So fun fact out there, if you replace 3% of your daily calories from animal-based protein with an equivalent amount of plant-based protein, so just kind of swapping out the protein source, how much will you decrease your risk of cardiovascular mortality? Well, it turns out it's 11% for men and 12% for women. So that's a pretty big bang for your buck. And the benefits of plant-based diets are, extraordinary. It's pretty much lower rates of everything that we would rather not have. So lower rates of all-cause mortality, less likely to get cancer, type 2 diabetes, less likely to have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, heart disease, having a more healthy weight, and even lower rates of things like cataracts and diverticular disease, endocrine disorders, gallstones, renal disease. So pretty much everything. And I would add to that list, actually, cognition, and dementia. So I already told you about the good news about what would happen if we switched to a more plant-forward or optimal diet. Unfortunately, this is the bad news, which if you look at what's happening in the United States, we're not actually doing very well at meeting that bar. This is some data from the NHANES studies, and it showed that the proportion of older adults who had a poor diet quality actually increased from 51 to 61% over this 17-year or 18-year study period. The proportion of older adults that were kind of in the middle, intermediate, that decreased from 49% to 39%. So it just shows that the people that were in the intermediate were actually kind of shifting to even worse diet quality. And the proportion of older adults that had that ideal diet remained very consistently, and I would say disappointingly low at 0.4%. So we have a lot of opportunity to be able to make a big difference based on the food choices that we make every day. All right, here's another fun fact. For every 10-gram increase in your daily fiber consumption, how much will you decrease your risk of all-cause mortality? And it turns out to be 10%. That's a pretty big deal. So for every 10-gram increase in your fiber, 10% decreased risk of all-cause mortality, which is dying of anything. But when I say that to my patients, you got to say, okay, that sounds great, doc, but how do you actually get 10 grams of fiber? Well, it's not that hard, actually. 1 cup of cooked chickpeas, for example, gives you 12.5 grams of fiber. What I have for breakfast every morning, which is some cooked rolled oats that also has some raisins and craisins and some chia seeds, some flax seeds, some berries or some other fruit, some walnuts on top. That would probably get me closer to 20 grams of fiber for the day. So you can see some of the other examples here, but fiber is everywhere in whole or minimally processed plant foods. Unfortunately, it's not at all in animal-based foods or most of the ultra-processed foods. So remember, fiber is your friend. It makes a huge difference in how full you feel. It helps with your blood sugar control. It helps your microbiome, all around good stuff. So what about ultra-processed foods? We talked about that a little bit. I love this quote from Michael Pollan, which is, "Don't eat anything your great-great-grandmother wouldn't recognize as food." And I think that's pretty accurate. It'd be great if we could classify things in studies that way. But, if you kind of want a gut check about, is this an ultra-processed food? Is this something I should be eating? Check and see if it's something that your great-great-grandmother would have recognized. Now, we do have classification systems for this stuff. There's the thing called the NOVA food classification, and that helps us when we're looking at studies about ultra-processed foods and the impacts of ultra-processed foods. So the way we look at the NOVA classification is there's the stuff over here that's in the green bar, and that's basically unprocessed or minimally processed foods. You're going to cook rice. So things that you're going to bake bread, that sort of stuff happens. But these are unprocessed or minimally processed. Then there's the processed culinary ingredients, and we use a lot of those too. Those are still going to be in your home kitchen, things like salt or maybe some olive oil or sugar. But then there's the processed foods. So those are culinary dishes that you've added these culinary ingredients. Actually, bread would really be in that category. And they are processed, but they are not the same as ultra-processed. Ultra-processed is the food products that are derived, I like how they say this, food or parts of food. And they've also had cosmetic food additives. So it's things that make it look better or things that make it last longer, things that are preservatives, things like anti-foaming agents and emulsifiers and things like that. Those are foods that are really not something you would be able to make in your own home kitchen because it has the chemical sort of things that we wouldn't typically have to work with. And we know that ultra processed foods are both everywhere. They're ubiquitous all over the place. You can find it in airports. You can find it in the hospital vending machines. You can find it in almost any place, like any roadside gas station. But they're also really challenging to self-regulate. It's really hard. Actually, back when I was younger, there was a commercial about potato chips that said, bet you can't just eat one. And I think that's really true for ultra processed foods. It sort of ties into our dopamine system, and it's very hard to feel full with a kind of smaller amount of these ultra processed foods. So they are not only ubiquitous, they also are the majority of what we eat. For adults, about 58% of our total food intake is ultra processed foods in the United States. For kids, it's even worse, it's 67%. And we know that it is hard to feel full on ultra processed food. So there was a study done by Kevin Hall's group where they looked at people who were admitted to like a hospital. It's kind of called a metabolic ward, and all their food was provided for them. And when they were presented with a buffet of food and said, hey, eat as much as you want, and it was more ultra processed foods, they actually ate 500 calories more a day than when they were presented with a similar buffet of foods, but that were more minimally processed foods. And so these people weren't actually being told to eat more, eat less, try to lose weight or gain weight. They were just said, hey, here's the food available, eat as much as you want. And when the ultra processed food was the majority of the buffets they were presented with, they ate a whole lot more than when it was minimally processed foods. And it's probably not surprising when you think of the caloric density. So this is just an example of the difference between potato chips and baked potatoes. Caloric density is how many calories you're eating in a certain volume of food. And when you look at, for example, potato chips, 1,000 calories of potato chips is only 6.3 ounces. So not that much. You're probably still going to be hungry even if you eat all 1,000 calories versus 1,000 calories of baked potato. And this isn't even something like 1,000 calories of spinach or greens or even fruits or things, but even a baked potato, 1,000 calories of baked potato, it's 2.3 pounds of potatoes. It would be really hard to eat all of that in one sitting. So one of the issues with ultra processed foods is they're usually very highly dense in calories, and that can be a challenge for us to be able to feel full. All right, another fun fact. How much does each daily serving of ultra-processed foods increase your risk of cardiovascular mortality? Turns out to be 9%. So I want everybody out there to be thinking about that the next time you're picking your afternoon snack or deciding, what you want to have as part of your dinner. Ultra-processed food servings can increase your risk of cardiovascular mortality pretty significantly. And we know it's not just cardiovascular mortality. The risk of ultra-processed foods are also seen in things like, or also, I should say, associated with obesity. We already talked about cardiovascular stuff, but also inflammatory bowel disease, depression, mortality in general, and also having unhealthy weight and higher blood cholesterol in kiddos, and also gestational weight gain and blood sugar issues in pregnancy. So ultra-processed foods increase the risk by two mechanisms here. One of it is the actual food itself. So it probably has more salt or maybe more sugar or very little fiber. It may have more fat, like more saturated fat. So it's what you're actually eating. That's one part. But the second part, and I think the sneaky part, is that it also decreases the amount of other health promoting foods you eat. There's only so much room in your stomach every day. So if you end up eating mostly ultra processed foods, there's the risk from the foods themselves, but there's also the risk of the fact that you are not getting some of the things like those fruits, whole vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and beans that we know are so health promoting. But are all ultra-processed foods, do they all have the same health impact? Now, this is a little challenging and is research that is still being is kind of ongoing. But we don't want to kind of, throw the baby out with the bathwater or say that everything is exactly the same, because not all ultra-processed foods are necessarily going to have the same impact. The question you need to ask is compared to what? Because if you are deciding to eat whatever food it is, if you're trying to say, is this healthy for me or not healthy for me, you really have to say compared to what. Pretty much anytime you eat broccoli or Brussels sprouts, that's going to be healthy no matter what. But if you start to get into some of these more processed foods, you have to say, what am I comparing it to? So let's look at that. Well, we know that there's definitely an increased risk of diabetes with ultra-processed foods. This is data from the Nurses' Health Study. It's a great study. They looked at food frequency questionnaires. They followed these people for a good period of time, and they categorized their ultra-processed food consumption with that NOVA criteria that I showed you earlier. And what they found is for total ultra-processed food consumption, it definitely increased diabetes risk, so much so that there was a 46% increased risk in the highest quintile compared to the lowest quintile of ultra-processed food consumption. So the people that were eating the most of it had the highest risk of type 2 diabetes. And when they really looked at like incrementalizing it, every 10% increase in the amount of ultra-processed food that somebody was eating resulted in about a 12% increased risk of type 2 diabetes. So, I mean, that kind of goes along with what we were talking about already, that that ultra-processed foods are not going to be that healthy for you. But it really mattered which type of ultra-processed food. So I thought that this was fascinating with this study. When they looked at what the people were actually eating, they found that diabetes risk was increased with refined bread products, sauces, spreads, and condiments, artificially and sugar sweetened beverages. That's a pretty much always a risk factor and something that I would recommend decreasing or eliminating. But then also animal-based products and those ready-to-eat mixed dishes that have all sorts of, there might be some dairy or there might be some meat, there might be some refined pasta in those. That increased risk. Whereas things like cereals, dark and whole grain bread, interestingly, packaged sweet and savory snacks, fruit-based products, and yogurt and dairy-based desserts did not seem to increase the risk of type 2 diabetes. And this is a big list of stuff that you can see from the wonderful Dr. Meagan Grega did a great study, kind of really like an analysis of how's plant-based meat stack up versus conventional meat. And now plant-based meat would be considered the ultra-processed in this case, whereas conventional meat would be considered minimally processed, just cooked. But when you look at the difference, actually in this case, the plant-based meat, the ultra-processed version in this case, actually is probably healthier than what it is replacing. When you look at the caloric density, the phytonutrients, which are going to have to do with anti-inflammatory effects, satiety, lower saturated fat, healthier gut microbiome, like just lots and lots of things that are positive as far as when we look at plant-based meat versus conventional meat. The only thing that might be considered a negative would be that there's often higher salt content in the plant-based processed meats versus conventional. So that's individual. I think we could pretty much wrap up for any individual. Your healthiest option are going to be those whole plant foods, your fruits, your veggies, your nuts, your seeds, your whole grains, your beans, your mushrooms, your spices. The more of those that you can fit on your plate, the better. But how about when we go one ring out, one step further and look at our communities? Well, this is part of what Kellyn Foundation does, is really focus on helping people not only grow their own healthy food, but also cook and enjoy their own healthy food. And also, how do we support our local farmers? Because being able to eat seasonally and buy locally is another really important part of helping our own bodies and helping our communities. So here's some of our kids doing the Garden as a Classroom program in the 47 different elementary schools that we serve. I love that over here on the right-hand side, one of their zucchinis that the kids grew got big enough that they gave it its own seat in the classroom so it could hang out with them. And these are just some of the farmers that we work with, but I would encourage wherever you are to connect with your local farmers and to be able to support local agriculture, because the nutrient density and the freshness and the taste of that food is going to be so much better. All right, so as we finish up our concentric circles here, let's talk about the planet. So we talked about our own personal health. We talked about the health of our communities. Let's talk about the health of the planet. And I really like this quote from my friend and colleague, Dr. David Katz, who says, "There are no healthy people on a dead planet." So how are we doing as far as our planetary boundaries? Well, I would recommend to everybody, there is this new, now just in 2025, it came out just maybe 2 weeks ago, Eat Lancet report. There's been the Eat Lancet report from 2019, which gave us an idea of how our food choices and other agricultural choices and some of the other things that we do as a society, how that was exceeding our planetary boundaries of what our planet can handle. But now they just did another kind of updated version of this. And what you can see here is that we are exceeding the planetary capacity to basically continue handling and staying stable in several different categories. And the most important thing as far as what we're talking about today is that agriculture, our food systems, the way we grow our food, the food choices that we make are actually the main driver of the majority of these boundaries that we are already exceeding. So our current food system is the single most influential driver. And it's driving 5 out of the 6 kind of categories that we have already breached as far as boundaries, and it's exerting an impact on some of the other ones as well. So the cool thing about the Eat Lancet report is they have this thing called the Planetary health diet. Previously we were kind of talking about our own personal health diet, but they have these recommendations for the Planetary health diet. And they say, hey, if you look at this line here that goes down right down through here, that is their recommendation of how much of these types of food could we eat within and also grow, within our planetary boundaries that would also be optimal for human health. So I love that about what they've done is they're not only just looking at the planet, they're looking at human health, getting enough calories, getting enough of the different vitamins and minerals and fiber, protein, all that good stuff. And what they found is we're eating as not only a global community, but especially in North America, which is the kind of bright red bar. We're eating too little of the whole grains, vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, and beans. And we're eating way too much of the roots. And because mostly the roots that we eat are white potatoes that are often deep fried. So it's not that roots are bad. I mean, carrots, sweet potatoes, there's a lot of things that are good about roots, but the roots that we choose to eat are maybe a little bit too much and too deep fried. But also milk, poultry, eggs, red meat, vegetable oil, animal fats, and sugar. So basically we are kind of putting that nutritional wisdom on its head. We're flipping it upside down based on the things that are good for our bodies and what's good for our planet. We're eating kind of in a way the opposite of that. So a global shift to a planetary health diet, if we could actually go more towards eating within that line that they have there, that would be estimated to prevent 15 million deaths per year globally, which is 27% of the deaths worldwide. So we got a lot of opportunity here. And I don't want anybody to feel like you have to go 100% all the way to perfect optimal diet every day of your life. I don't think that's necessarily reasonable or necessary, but we have a lot of room to shift towards a healthier option for ourselves, for our communities, and for our planet. So I don't want to depress you with all of that. I love this quote from Maya Angelou, which says, do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. And I think that's a lot of what we're all talking about today. So this actually should be a picture of Amanda and I, but I think because of the uploading, it looks kind of funky. So it's time for us to shift over to Chef Amanda, where she can actually talk about all of the wonderful ways that we can get some of these fruits and veggies and whole grains and nuts and seeds and beans into our diet. Hello, Chef Amanda.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Dr. Meagan Grega. I really appreciated that.
It's a pleasure to see you in your wonderful kitchen.
It is definitely my natural habitat. I feel at home here. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I'm very excited to be here, and I am equally as excited to share the stage with Dr. Meagan Grega. That was a wonderful presentation, and hopefully I can follow it with some great cooking tips on how to make our version of harvest vegetable soup. This soup is not only delicious, it is a colorful, nutrient-packed celebration of local produce, as well as real food that can not only help your taste buds, but also help different parts of your body feel full and feel good during this crazy transition into fall. I am going to be doing a little bit of a showcase style because I don't think everybody wants to watch me cook this for 45 minutes. So again, at the end, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I'd be happy to elaborate more. For those of you that are just starting with plant-forward cooking, what I like to often highlight is I would like you to add more fruits and vegetables onto your plates and not necessarily think about taking things away. This plant-forward soup is a great way to highlight and also hide a lot of vegetables that really meld together really wonderfully, but also can introduce people to some new tastes as well. So to begin, we are going to start with our aromatics. This is very standard of most soups and foods. We have two options in our recipe. You can start with sauteing with either vegetable stock, We make ours homemade in the kitchen with all of our vegetable peels and excess produce that we don't use. If you are not making 60 gallons of soup a week, like we sometimes do here in Kellyn Kitchens, you're welcome to make your own vegetable stock, buy any excess stuff off of vegetables, onion peels, pepper carcasses, sorry for the verbiage, tomato cores. You can throw those into a gallon-sized bag, put it in the freezer, and anytime that you're ready, you can make vegetable stock from scratch. You can also buy from the store. Just make sure that you're trying to get the low sodium variety. If you're not looking to saute with vegetable stock, you can use little bits of olive oil. We like to use extra virgin cold pressed olive oil to really get the most nutrients out of it. Little bits. So what we're going to do, we're going to start with a tablespoon of olive oil. I have a medium onion diced here. I have garlic, which is absolutely fantastic. I would add 5 to 6 cloves of garlic into everything that I make if other people were consuming it. But not only will this add a lot of delicious flavors, but overall for our health, this really gives our immune system a really good boost. I also have celery here. If I was making this at home for my kiddos, I would also probably shred up some carrots to make that disappear within. And we're also going to add bell pepper. I know that green bell pepper sometimes messes with some people's stomachs, especially if it's raw. This recipe, you can really curate anything to what's in your fridge and what's available. I sometimes use all fresh vegetables. Sometimes if I have a lot of excess produce and I freeze it, you can throw this in a pot and utilize any of that. So this can really be curated to whatever you have on hand, which not only makes it great for budget, because it's going to come together really well with any of the spices that you're using, but it's great for planned overs as well. So what we like to say in our family, but also at Kellyn Kitchens, is try to plan out your meals in a way that you make one main thing, make a lot of it, and how can you utilize it in a bunch of different ways. So this is going to be a soup. I could also have it over grains. My kiddos will just eat the insides. They're obsessed with beans. So how can you use it throughout the week to not only make your meal prep easier, but also your life easier while you're trying to eat more of a plant-forward way. So have my pot. We're going to add in just a little bit of olive oil. And then when you're doing this and you're not in a commercial kitchen where a hot stove can turn on and turn on fans, make sure this is really hot, whether you're using vegetable stock or olive oil. You want to make sure that when you throw your vegetables in that they're starting the caramelization process. So we're going to do the onions in there, the garlic. Again, I have on my recipe 2 cloves of garlic. If you want to add more, that's great. I definitely recommend using fresh if you can, just for the nutrient boost. But if you are somebody that can't keep garlic on your counter from going bad, you can always use the prepped garlic in the fridge. So we're going to throw this on and then saute it for 3 to 5 minutes until your onions start to become translucent. If you smell the onions and garlic, and I know all of you know what I'm talking about, as soon as you smell it, that's really your signal that the flavor base is starting to bloom. So once it is cooking, then we're going to talk about adding the winter squash or sweet potatoes and spices. I have 2 versions here. I have sweet potato, and I also have a butternut squash. A lot of times people with squash are very nervous to use something like this because they aren't sure how to cut it. We want all of your fingers to be attached to your hands by the end of this. So if you feel more comfy with sweet potatoes, go the sweet potato route. We like to leave the skin on. Make sure you wash it very well, but the skin is actually where a lot of the nutrients are housed. In regards to butternut squash, there's a lot of easy ways to cut this. Very sharp knife is your #1 tool in a kitchen, but also a plant-forward kitchen when you're trying to utilize a lot of vegetables. A sharp knife is safer than a dull knife. And if you take your fingers and curl them, cut on the outside so if anything slips, you're just cutting a little bit of your knuckle and not your actual finger. So what I like to do is I cut right above the ball of the butternut squash where the seeds are housed. This we can utilize later. And then I cut on the top as well. Then I have this nice cylinder form that is easy to utilize. So what I then do is I go through and I cut the skin off. If you want, and this scares you still, you can utilize a peeler. Just know that depending on the time of year, how long butternut squashes have cured, if it comes from your garden or if it comes from the store, sometimes the skin of the butternut squash can be a little bit hard to peel through. So if I'm getting all this off, then I have a very easy piece of vegetable to work with. So please don't be worried about you utilizing winter squash. It's a lot easier than you think, and they are full of nutrients, and not only nutrients, but also flavor. The different veggies that we already have in there, so the onions, the celery, the bell peppers, we have potassium, we have antioxidants, we have vitamin C, we have veggies that support immune and gut health, we have anti-inflammatories. Spices are another way to not only add flavor, but also help our immune system as a whole. So in here, I have turmeric, I have basil, I have paprika, cinnamon, cayenne. Cinnamon is a great way to add flavor and sweetness to highlight all the local and the seasonal vegetables without actually adding a sweetener. Turmeric, great for your immune system, but also is an antioxidant powerhouse. We have basil. You can utilize fresh or dried. On my recipe, I have 1 1/4 teaspoons of dried basil. If you're using fresh, just make sure to use at least 3 times the amount. And don't accidentally do that backwards because your soup is going to be very herbaceous if you do 3 times the amount of dried versus fresh. And then we have a little bit of cayenne in here. Please don't be scared of this cayenne. It is not a spicy amount. You may omit if you're worried about it, but this just kind of brings it a really underlying heat that rounds out the soup as a whole. So I'm going to add all of this in. I do have salt in the recipe. We minimized it to a lesser amount, and I have either coconut aminos or soy sauce for later on in the recipe. If you're trying to do completely SOS, no salt, oil, or added sugar, feel free to omit and then just add a little bit to coconut aminos, some soy sauce, or none at all. So we're going to add this in with our winter squash. Notice that this is not cooked yet, and this is part of the process of sauteing it all together. I know everyone's kind of laughing that I'm not actually cooking this piece, but trust me, the fans would be a lot louder. It would be harder to hear. So what's next is our tomatoes and our beans. I have on our recipe that you can use fresh tomatoes or you can use canned tomatoes. If you're going to utilize canned tomatoes, please just try to use the low sodium or the no salt added. And then fresh tomatoes, just know that this is going to take a little bit longer to cook down versus the canned. I like, especially this time of year, I'm trying to get as many of the tomatoes out of my garden as possible and utilize them as much as we can. So I chose to use the fresh. Tomatoes are high in lycopene, which is a cancer fighter. It's also good for our heart, our skin health. And then beans, like Dr. Meagan talked about, are very high in fiber, but also protein. We try to utilize beans in as many of our recipes as possible. Play with different textures and flavors with the beans. On this recipe, I have chickpeas, but some people really don't like that texture, so feel free to change out to northern beans or to cannellini beans. You could even do kidney beans. Any of those are great plant protein fiber. It's slow carbs for steady energy, and it's really going to make you feel overall a lot more satisfied with the meal. So these will get in. Just a highlight for beans, make sure to rinse your beans out of the can. If you just rinse your beans, standard beans, it cuts the sodium levels by about 40%. So it really helps overall. So rinse them out or get low sodium or no sodium added beans. While this is cooking, all of that is getting very happy behind me. This is where we get to kind of think about how we want to finish it, how we want to bring all these flavors together. Like I said, I'm going to be adding coconut aminos for a gluten-free version. If you wanted to use low sodium soy sauce, if that's what you have on hand, fantastic. This adds a lot of umami depth and it does not use a lot of extra added salt, which is helpful compared to if we were just seasoning with only salt. On the recipe, I also have optional greens. Anytime that you can hide greens into anything would be a fantastic addition to your meal. So they are one of the healthiest things on the planet. They have tons of nutrients in it that, unfortunately, many people in the United States do not get enough of. And so when I'm making soups, or if I'm making sautés, or anything that I'm warming up, this wilts away. And so it's very simple to add it. Add iron and calcium and vitamin K, folate, phytonutrients without anybody really knowing. So when I'm adding greens, take kale. This is kale from my garden. I'm sorry, it gets a little fun this time of year because it's kind of cold. But I take the end of it and I just pull the stem out. You're welcome to keep this in if you want, but it's just a little harder to bite through, and it won't disappear as well as if you take this extra leafy greens out. So I take all of that, and then I'm just gonna do a rough chop. And depending on if you are cooking this for yourself and you like kale, do a pulled chop. That's totally fine. But if you're cooking for kiddos like mine or my husband, we need to make this as little and as slivered as possible, so it really just looks like an herb in there and not necessarily a green. Again, kale is very hardy. You can't really bruise it up. If you're using other greens such as spinach, just be careful that if you're not going to use it right away, like if you're prepping the ingredients beforehand, you can accidentally bruise it and make it a little slimy. But kale is invincible. So add that in. And this would be when you would add vegetable stock as well. Again, we make this in-house. We keep it on hand. If you don't have time for that, or that kind of worries you, pick it up at the store. No big deal. These flavors also, with all of these different herbs, we are adding a lot of flavor with the levels of the aromatics, and then the squash and the spices and the tomatoes and the chickpeas. Honestly, if you only have water, you're going to be fine. Just know that you'll probably have to add a little bit more spices to balance out the flavor. At this point, we would try the soup, and if you wanted a little bit more brightness, I would say add a juiced lemon in there. Adds a lot more flavor. You don't have to utilize as much salt. If you want more spice, add more cayenne or red pepper flakes. But like I said before, the soup is fantastic for batch cooking and freezing. Look at this. We made this soup together. How impressive. But if you look at it, it has tons of veggies. It's super pretty to look at. The turmeric, the tomato, the herbs, the spices. It really is a pretty dish that will get people excited to have it. And it's budget friendly and overall reduces waste. We are looking at something that it's rich in fiber, vitamin A and C. Soups like this can lower inflammation and really overall support our heart health. Imagine if the world, or even just the United States or your community, swapped out one processed meal a week for something like this. Imagine the change that we would see. So I'm happy that we got to demo this harvest vegetable soup. It's an easy way to highlight that the healthy choice can really be the easy choice, and that it can be warm and satisfying and nutrient dense, but also nourishing without being overly complicated. I am excited to show that the simplest dishes can really be enjoyed, and I hope that all of you are able to make it with your loved ones this holiday season. Thank you.
That was amazing.
Thank you.
Well, I think this is the key. That is why I love soups and chilies and stir fries, because like you said, it decreases food waste. You got stuff in your fridge. It needs to be used. This is a great way for you to be able to use it and enjoy it. I also loved what you talked about the hiding the dark leafy greens, because I feel like that is one of the things that most of us don't get enough of. So being able to throw them into a stir fry or a soup is, everything tastes delicious, but it's getting you some more of that, like you said, calcium and iron and all the things we need. So thank you. I often say that really food is medicine, but since food is medicine, who is the pharmacist? It's our chefs and our farmers. They're the ones who are really helping us out with that. So I'm thrilled to be partnering with somebody who knows how to make not only healthy food, but healthy food delicious.
Thank you so much, both of you. I wanted to just say I'm lucky enough that I've eaten the Kellyn kitchen food, and that also Chef Amanda is the director of operations and culinary medicine at Kellyn Foundation. She's a magna cum laude graduate of the Culinary Institute of America, and she has a bachelor's degree in applied food studies and business management. I feel so honored to be inside the Kellyn kitchen. And as I said, the food that I've had at Ethos Farm days really just drives home the food is medicine initiative. And I'm so grateful. And so we do have some great questions coming in. I also wanted to thank you, Dr. Grega. I know, your presentation was just an incredible summary. I know we can always count on you to get to the heart of the research. And if you joined us after Dr. Grega's summary slide, she said the preferred nutritional approach is to follow a low sodium, high potassium dietary pattern that includes consumption of ample servings of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes, while limiting amounts of saturated fat, red meat, and processed red meat, processed foods containing added sugar, sodium, and refined grains, and sugar-sweetened beverages. So in other words, a lot of the whole foods that we just saw Chef Amanda do right in front of us in one easy, delicious, one-pot meal. So do we have time for a couple of questions?
I do.
Okay, great.
Okay, good.
Come in via email. Dr. Grega, in your talk, you mentioned striving to have a healthy dietary pattern. What does that mean for me, the average person at home?
Well, I think that we shouldn't make perfect the enemy of good. So it's an important thing for you to figure out, where are you now as far as your fruit and vegetable consumption, your whole grains, your nuts, seeds, beans, and your sugar sweetened beverages, your ultra processed foods, all of that. So I don't want to make it too vague, but I also think it's very difficult to go from the standard American diet to just like overnight going to a whole food plant predominant diet. So I liked what Chef Amanda said about how can we add things in and not focus primarily or completely on taking things away. So I would say there's a couple things to start with. If you're trying to shift to a more optimal dietary pattern, one, look at your sugar sweetened beverage consumption. If you're having several of those a day, how can you start cutting that down with things that are more, either water with fruit, like lemon slices or other types of fruit or veggies in your water. Maybe not having the sugar in the coffee or in the tea or those sorts of things, not trying to decrease or remove energy drinks. So sugar sweetened beverages is one that is a kind of a low hanging fruit, I think of in a way to move forward and be able to not maybe miss that as much. Then start looking at how many servings of fruits and vegetables are you having a day? And are you having any beans? Like, are you having a serving of beans a day or not? See where you can add that in. And then also look at, what are your snacks? Is there a way that you can maybe shift from a packaged snack that might be an ultra processed food to something that might be more of like a nut, some nuts, or some nuts and some dried fruit, or maybe some apple with some peanut butter, or something that would be less processed and that would be more promoting. One of the places I think that is the easiest to start is breakfast, because we all have a little bit more control over our breakfast sometimes than we do over our dinners, and see how you can slant your breakfast.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. And another question came in. What about the cost of a plant-based diet for families and for communities? Is it affordable?
Such a great question. Thank you for calling out the elephant in the room in a way that people often ask that question. So the answer is actually yes, it is affordable, but it depends on what you're choosing as your plant slant. So for example, if you're getting organic berries in January, that's going to fresh organic berries in January. That's probably going to be pretty expensive, but the big bag of frozen mixed berries, not as expensive. Same thing with, for example, broccoli florets or spinach. The frozen is just as good as the fresh and usually a lot less expensive. There are many parts of a whole food plant-based diet that are really inexpensive. So dried beans, and we can talk at some point about, how do you make those in the pressure cooker and in the slow cooker, and then freeze different servings of them or portions of them, or even if you get them in the cans, they're pretty inexpensive. Brown rice, apples, potatoes, onions. There's a lot of the kind of underlying components of a plant-based diet that are pretty inexpensive. The thing is, you kind of have to spend the time making a lot of your food yourself as far as trying to make it as cost effective as possible. So batch cooking is really important. And then don't forget about, if you can, and not everybody can, but if you can grow some of your own fresh vegetables, definitely spices, things like that, that can make a big impact too. So eating seasonally, it's cheaper then, and it's also more, has more of the nutrients. And then batch cooking and utilizing frozen as well as dried beans and things like that can be really, really helpful.
Those are really great suggestions. I do see another question that came in via email. You both spend time in classrooms introducing kids to real nourishing foods. What do you find hopeful in those classrooms? Can
I
kids
love
change what they eat?
Yeah, no, I love that actually. And I think that's one of the things that both Chef Amanda and I and our co-founder for Kellyn, Eric Ruth, that we love so much is how open kids are to trying different types of foods if they either grew it themselves or helped make it themselves, if they help cook it, because we do cooking classes or demos and things like that in schools as well, is that the positive peer pressure of having a bunch of kids sitting around in a group and trying something that they made or that they grew, that you can actually see a lot of really positive and enjoying type of kind of the way that they react to it. So we often hear from parents who will call us and say, where did you get that salad that you fed my child? They said they liked it. I want to go buy it. And we'll say, well, it's in your school garden, come harvest some, because that's where we got it from, or that's what your kids are doing. So we actually think with some of the best times to impact children's eating behaviors is in that preschool and elementary school time, when they haven't necessarily like hardened into the habits that a lot of us have as we're older. Doesn't mean that you can't change your habits when you're older, but kids will love fruits and vegetables and whole grains and beans and all that sort of stuff, as long as it's prepared in a way that tastes good, which Chef Amanda has all sorts of ideas about how we can make it taste good. If it's kind of like soggy, nasty, tasteless green beans, well, maybe not. But if it's a fresh cherry tomato out of your garden, yep, they will definitely like that.
Great. And we do have one question for Chef Amanda. A listener is asking, they're saying, thank you for bringing creative ways to the kitchen. And they know that you serve plant-based meals directly to your local community from the Kellyn Kitchen food truck and your weekly meal pickups. And they wanted to know what inspired you, Chef Amanda, to take your culinary career down this path.
Oh, such a good question. So, yeah, I had a very traditional culinary path. I really enjoy food and how it brings people together. That's what really pushed me to go to the Culinary Institute of America and study on how to curate delicious French cooking. Through that process, though, as many people in the culinary industry would understand and attest to, I experienced burnout. I also experienced not healthy eating habits as the overall response to that. So years in the culinary industry, I was loving what I was doing. I was making delicious food, but my body wasn't feeling great, and my brain also didn't feel great with the type of food that I was providing for people, even though it was bringing everyone together. Their bodies weren't really getting to reap the benefits. So I moved back home. Kellyn Foundation is an incredible nonprofit that didn't have a kitchen at that point. And the co-founders, Meagan and Eric, said, try to make us some plant-forward food that tastes delicious. And I said, you can't do that. It takes salt and sugar and fat out of people's diets. It's not going to taste good. And they said, try. And in that process, I was totally up for the challenge. And during that 1, 2, 3 years, as we were curating Kellyn Kitchen's 120 plus recipes that we now get to serve to the community, I was able to experience not only the benefits of this type of cooking, but also the freedom, because it really makes you think out of the box. And I got to try tons of different cuisines and enjoy the ingredients and enjoy the food. And in that process, I was able to become a lot healthier myself. which I have now been able to really transform with my relationship with food for not only me, but also my family, my little kiddos, and my extended family. So it's been a rewarding experience, and I'm excited to see how it keeps going.
How wonderful. Thank you. And let's see. So thank you both for creating clarity around such a timely issue. You've given us so much to think about tonight when it comes to the ripple effect of our own food choices on our environment, for our communities, for longevity, and for the planet. We now know that the body has an amazing capacity to heal. And when we're able to focus on whole, nutrient-rich plant foods, we stand the best chance of supporting our health from the inside out. So thank you so much for partnering with us for the celebration of World Food Day. You can see more from the Kellyn Foundation at www.kellyn.org. Jim will put that in the comments section. And if you are so inspired by tonight's show that you would like to get a jump on your health before the new year begins, our next Jump Start begins on Thursday, October 23rd. And you can see more about that on our website, plantpoweredmetronewyork.org, or my little shortcut, ppmny.org, and you can click on Jump Starts. So again, special thank you to all of our guests, and also to my team members behind the scenes to make this live stream possible. Jim, of course, Grace, Leanna, and Hannah. So please follow us, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or join our newsletter so you won't miss the next event. You can also donate to support our mission so we can continue to bring you great speakers and help more people make a difference in their health. Every donation helps. We wish you all a great evening, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks for joining.